Welcome to Impact News, your news for the week. Folks, we begin with our commentary. The highly politicized Supreme Court, and some say extremely dangerous U.S. Supreme Court, will be taking on some very important cases this term. The court will decide issues involving affirmative action, also voting rights, the rights of LGBTQ people, and more. And that's why you need to vote in November so we can get all these people out, because we have to enlarge the Supreme Court, and we can only do it with people in Congress who actually care. And we got a lot of them in there now who apparently don't. In cases from Harvard University and the University of North Carolina, the court could end any consideration of race in college admissions. Also, the court could further reduce protections for minority voters. Oh, we know they're desperate to get that job done. The case the justices are hearing involves Alabama, where just one of the state's 7 congressional districts has a black majority, even though 27% of the state's residents are black, folks. This is the court's third major consideration in 10 years, folks, of the landmark Voting Rights Act. They're doing everything they can to dilute the vote. They don't have any policies. All they want is power and money. Get ye to the polls. Stand in line. Either vote in early voting or vote on election day. Don't let them intimidate you. You have to vote, because we got to get rid of them. And they're going to do everything they can to keep us from doing that. Also today, Republicans are asking the justice to embrace a legal concept that's going to mean the state courts have no role to play in congressional elections, including redistricting. Now, that's because, of course, Donald Trump, there were 60 court cases that Donald Trump tried to say, oh my God, I won. And every one of those justices and every one of those 60 cases threw those cases out. So now they're trying to make it so the judge has no role in it, okay? In another case, the court is being asked to rule on the nation's chief law to combat water pollution. Something we can't live without. Ooh, these are the worst people. And the Biden administration is back at the Supreme Court. It's arguing for a change in immigration policy. It's a case where a Trump-era policy favored deporting people, of course, in the country illegally, unless Trump needed them for workers at his Mar-a-Lago, because he does what he wants to do. Where it's a case where a Trump-era policy favored deporting people in the country illegally, regardless of criminal history or community ties. Finally, the court's going to rule on whether someone's Christian beliefs allow them to discriminate. How can you call yourself a Christian and then discriminate? The whole thing is just that these people are nuts. They got to go. Finally, the court will rule on whether someone's Christian beliefs allow them to discriminate against same-sex couples. Folks, right now, 58% of Americans disapprove of how this court is doing its job. A lot of that due to the Dobbs decision, that where they reversed Roe v. Wade and took away a woman's right to control her body, a right a woman had had for 50 years. Yes, folks. And then, of course, there's Clarence Thomas, married to Jenny Thomas, who was heavily involved in the post-election Big Lie campaign and perhaps with illegal attempts to overturn the election. The Supreme Court looks like a bunch of thugs, people, and we got to get rid of them. And I've said this before, believe it or not, of all the ones that are voting against, it's interesting that they're all Catholics, which means we also need religious diversity on the court. Folks, it is a mess. You can change it. This is our last chance, folks. I'm not kidding. You got to stand in line at those polls, or you got to vote in early voting. Don't do a mail-in ballot unless you have to, because we know the devil is busy. I'm Carol Angela Davis. Stay tuned for more. Carol Angela Davis, and welcome to Impact News, bringing you the news from all around the neighborhood and all around the world, starting with your headlines, folks. Okay, Ron Desantis and the appointment of someone to lead a black county in Florida who has KKK leanings. Thanks, Ron. Can't do us any favors, can you? Also, a racist sheriff in North Carolina gets his comeuppance. Plus, we have news of Clarence Thomas. Can we finally get rid of that man? Also, apparent welfare cheat Brett Favre. We have news there. Then the National Archives says it is still missing records from the Trump administration. Plus, relief centers to support Caribbean asylum seekers in the U.S. Then the Arctic Ocean is acidifying, and it's real scary. Stay tuned for that. Then the 1,200-year drought in the west of the United States. Plus, the rise of sexually transmitted diseases. A new dorm at the University of Maryland named for African Americans. And finally today, a new documentary on iconic black women fashionistas. Stay with me. We begin with Florida Governor Ron Desantis. Ron Desantis is at it again. This time he apparently appointed someone white to manage mostly black Gadsden County, Florida. Can't stop that Ron Desantis, okay? That person had to quit after a KKK photo of him came out. Well, you know, birds of a feather. Desantis has no respect for the black community. The appointee's name is Jeffrey Moore. He was appointed in July, and it didn't take 60 days for a photo to show up, which apparently shows him wearing a KKK robe and hood. The question, was it a Halloween party? The answer, who cares? It is still an expression of violent racial hate, and he took part in it, and that's enough. You should also know that Moore is the past chairman of the Gadsden Soil and Water Conservation District. Can you imagine the negative impact he has had on the soil and the water of African Americans in that area? It's disgraceful. All right, let's turn on. Imagine a sheriff saying this of his black officers: F them black bastards. Oh yeah, people, it's on, okay? It's just time to clean them out. Those parents come from Columbus County, North Carolina Sheriff Jody Green, who defeated the first black sheriff, and he defeated him by 34 votes. And since we're dealing with Republicans, we don't know what they've done to the balance, okay? We just don't know. He then went on a racist tirade in a phone call, which was caught on tape by interim Sheriff Jason Soles, who let the public know exactly what was going on. Green also reportedly tried to get an interim sheriff appointed. Now, here's who he wanted to get appointed. This man had been arrested and charged for punching a handcuffed black man in the face. Yes. In the end, Green demoted the two black officers on the county sheriff's command, and one of them was eventually fired. Whew. Of course, Green denies any racial intent or racism. What? Who? Me? Couldn't be. Okay, dude, that's what they all say. All right, then why was Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas the only member of the U.S. Supreme Court to oppose the release of Mark Meadows' texts and other information to the January 6th committee? Those very texts, okay, we know the text, they included communications with his wife, Jenny Thomas, as she tried to overturn the election. Allegedly, for now. We'll get the proof. I mean, the January 6th committee already has it. Just how involved was Clarence Thomas in the attempt to overthrow the election? Folks, he must go. Even the appearance of impropriety for a Supreme Court justice is a problem. The question remains, was a sitting Supreme Court justice involved in the attempt to overthrow the election? And because there is a question out there that serious about a Supreme Court justice, he must go, because he's not going to recuse himself. He's already shown us that. Let's move on. What of dear old apparent welfare cheat Brett Favre? Oh yes, dear Brett Favre, a Hall of Famer, a wealthy man, but it just isn't enough, okay? These types never get enough, no matter how much they have. They always want more, and they want to take it from you. Now, there are calls for the ex-Green Bay Packers quarterback, that's Brett Favre, that's who we're talking about, to be removed from the Pro Football Hall of Fame. This after he reportedly received millions of dollars from a Mississippi welfare project for his pet projects, while the black, brown, and poor persons of the state did not get that money to help uplift themselves. That's badly needed cash. Fortunately, his SiriusXM show has been put on hold. Thank you to SiriusXM for that. He and others are being sued by the Mississippi Department of Human Services. So where are the great and so-called righteous NFL fans? Where are you? Who are saying nothing, but whose little insecurities, and they've got a lot of them, could not tolerate Colin Kaepernick taking a knee to oppose police brutality. These people are pathetic. Now, let's go to the National Archives, which says it still doesn't have all the Trump records, folks. As you know, the National Archives and Records Administration is responsible for preserving presidential records, and now it's told the House Oversight Committee that it still doesn't have all the records from the Trump administration officials that should have been transferred under the Presidential Records Act. Next up, the archives is going to consult with the Department of Justice to try to see what the Department of Justice feels it should do to try and get these records back. Under the Presidential Records Act, the immediate staff of the president, the vice president, and anyone who advises the president must preserve records and phone calls pertaining to their official duties. Moving on, we're going to New York City, where Mayor Eric Adams announces relief centers to support Caribbean asylum seekers. New York City opening its humanitarian emergency response and relief centers to support the hundreds of asylum seekers, including Caribbean nationals, arriving in New York City daily from Texas and other border cities. The asylum seekers are mostly Haitians. Also today, scientists say they are shocked that the Arctic Ocean is acidifying up to 4 times faster than the other seas. That is the word from a new study published in the journal Science. The Arctic and Antarctic regions absorb a third, folks, of all the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That is the key way that the planet self-cools. But the accumulation of greenhouse gases, which are byproducts of burning fossil fuels and burning carbon, it has destabilized these processes. Researchers say rapid sea ice loss promotes a faster intake of carbon dioxide in the Atlantic, Pacific, Indian, and Antarctic and subantarctic basins. Meanwhile, folks, the news is not good over there in Switzerland. A new report finds that 2022 is a disastrous year for melting Swiss glaciers. The new study indicates that about 6% of the glacial volume melted this year. Now, you should know, folks, that before this year, ice loss percentages as small as 2% were considered to be extreme. This is 3 times that. All right. It's all due to heat waves in Europe and light winter snowfall for the 2021-2022 year. We're in trouble. Act accordingly. And the West is suffering a pervasive drought that began in 2000 and is the driest mega drought the region has seen in 1,200 years, people. About 25,000 cattle ranches, you should know, are located in the American Southwest. Many ranchers are wondering whether or not their children will be able to carry on the family ranching tradition. Already 2/3 of ranchers are reporting that they've had to sell off parts of their herds. You should know that average herd sizes are expected to have fallen 36% across the region in 2022, a figure that rises to 43% in New Mexico, 50% in Texas. In June, extreme heat killed 2,000 cattle in Kansas. Then looking at your health, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, it says sexually transmitted diseases such as gonorrhea, chlamydia, and syphilis, all of them rose in 2021, folks. And they have infected 2.5 million Americans. Gonorrhea increased 2.8%, reaching almost 700,000 infections in 2021. Chlamydia, which had declined in 2020, increased 3% last year. Folks, apparently the problem is tied to a decrease in condom usage and lack of funding for public health. Moving on, the University of Maryland's got a newly renamed dorm that is now named for trailblazing Black students. Folks, it's called Johnson-Whittle Hall, and it's named for Elaine Johnson Coates and Hiram Whittle. They were among the first to enroll at the school. African Americans to enroll at the school. Coates is 84. He was one of 7 Black students allowed to live on the campus when she entered UMD in the fall of 1955. Coates is a female. Coates, okay, just to tell you again, her name is Elaine Johnson Coates. She entered in the fall of 1955. Meanwhile, Whittle, who died in 2021, was the first African American male admitted to UMD in 1951. All right, and then also and finally today, please check out Vogue and YouTube Originals as they explore the legacy of Black models. We've got a 6-part series going. It's a documentary based on Marcellus Reynolds' book. That book was written in 2019. The name of it is Supreme Models, Iconic Black Women Who Revolutionized Fashion. The series chronicles the evolution of Black beauty and its impact on the fashion industry, the civil rights movement, the Black is Beautiful movement, and the influence on American culture. That's going to be super interesting. I can't wait to see it. I'm Carol Angela Davis. Stay with me. Be right back with your Slay Word. Time for the Slay Word of the Week, folks. And the word this week is existential, E-X-I-S-T-E-N-T-I-A-L, existential. That's an adjective, meaning, as you know, it modifies or describes that noun. Its origin is from Latin in the late 17th century. The definition is relating to existence. You're hearing a lot of it on the news. They're using the word a lot now on the news. Here's our sentences. The climate we are facing poses an existential threat to the continuation of life. Second sentence, folks. The January 6th investigation poses an existential threat to Donald Trump, his children, and everyone in his orbit. That is our Slay Word of the Week, folks. It's existential. It's relating to existence. Use it all week and level up your vocab.
I'm just sick and tired of us not spending time together lately.
I know, baby. I know. I'm sorry I haven't spent time with you. I've just been working on this big deal. It's gonna bring a lot more money to the household for
What you doing here, boss?
Yeah, just checking to see if you still got it.
You take this work. You partner. I don't want it back.
I've seen the movies, man. I know how this goes.
You see the movie, huh? What you see? Goodfellas, New Jack City.
Everything I do is for you. Like, I just need a little bit more time, man. Fine bullshit. Like I said, he's gonna call any second.
Why don't you take a look at this video? Guess what? It's starring you.
Where are you? We're out there looking for you. In our missing segment, we highlight missing African American girls, and with the community's help, we will find them. Lashaya Stein was 16 years old when she disappeared from Aurora, Colorado in 2016. There is surveillance video of Lashaya walking in the area of East Montview Boulevard and North Peoria Street in Aurora. Lashaya was seen during the early hours of July 15, 2016. She was wearing a black V-neck shirt, black stone-washed jeans, and a silver watch on her left arm. She also has a round scar on her chest. There is a $15,000 reward in Lashaya's case. Call Crime Stoppers with any information to help us find Lashaya Stein. Where are you? We are working to find you, and with the community's help, we will. We're back with your international report. You know, we bring it to you every week. Dr. Inyang Ebong Harship, as you know, she is our expert, traveled the world, knows about policy, worked for the United Nations. Welcome, Edie.
Thank you, Carol. Today, I want to talk about elections and governance, because you know that's a thing that I'm interested in. And I want to talk about Brazil, which is one of the most populous countries in Latin America. And Jair Bolsonaro, who's the Donald Trump of Brazil, is up against Lula, the former president of Brazil. And everybody thought that in the first round, Lula was just going to sweep the table. And it turns out that that was not the case, that Jair Bolsonaro did much better in the polls than people predicted. So President Lula got 48.4% of the votes, and Jair Bolsonaro got 43.2% of the votes. And what's even more interesting is that his party, the people in his party that were up for elections in the Senate and the House, have done much, much better than was expected. They got 19 out of the 27 seats. And so it's looking like even if Lula does become the president, he will have very little room to maneuver, because they believe that Jair Bolsonaro's party is going to sweep the upper house and the lower house. Meanwhile, 30 million people abstained from voting. So again, we have this thing where, yes, 165 are scheduled to vote, but 30 million of them did not vote. So what does that really say about the elections? Meanwhile, if Bolsonaro can pull off an election victory, that means that it's the first right-wing government in Latin America, because you've had a sweep of leftists in Colombia, in Chile, in Mexico. So that would be a change, to have a right-wing government in Brazil. Meanwhile, Bolsonaro, like Donald Trump, has gone around saying the polls are rigged, the polls are rigged, the polls are rigged, especially if he doesn't win. However, now he's on the up. He's like, it's not so bad. But he has to have a narrative to tell his people if he doesn't win. So we'll be watching this space.
They better vote over there in Brazil. They better get to the polls, because Bolsonaro cares nothing about the rainforest.
Absolutely nothing. In fact, the people that he's appointed, that got appointed to the Senate, that got one seats in the Senate, was the minister, the former minister of health that messed up the COVID response, a former minister of environment that was corrupt with the Amazon and was allowing illegal logging. So you basically have very substandard people in positions of power and authority.
Just like Donald Trump, you know, it's
just like Donald Trump. And that's why it's so fascinating for me, because Brazil has even bigger problems than the United States. It's still a developing country, no matter how advanced it is. And so it's very interesting to watch this election and see what will happen. The runoff will be on the 30th of October, so watch this space.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Inyang Ebong Harship. As you know, she's your international specialist. Edie, thank you so much for joining us. And you stay with us. We'll be right back with Ask Dr. K.
Thank you, Carol.
I'm just sick and tired of us not spending time together lately.
I know, baby. I'm sorry I even spending time with you. I've been working on this big deal. It's gonna bring a lot more money to the household for me.
What you doing here, boss? Yeah, just checking to see if you still got it. You take this work. Your partner. I don't want it back.
I've seen the movies, man. I know how this goes.
You see the movie, huh? What you see? Goodfellas, New Jack City.
Everything I do is for you. Like, I just need a little bit more time, man. Fine bullshit. Like I said, he's gonna call any second.
Okay, let me ask you this. Why don't you take a look at this video? Guess what? It's starring you.
Carol Angela Davis back at you, closing out the show with Ask Dr. K, as we always do. Welcome, Dr. K.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. We're talking about breast cancer over and over and over again at this time of year because the incidence of breast cancer in Black women has flattened. However, we are still getting it in too high numbers. We're dying of it, and we're being diagnosed at too young of an age. So let's dive into it. Today's topic is diabetes. And 12.7% of women from the African diaspora have the diagnosis of diabetes. And when you think about it, that's actually less than 1 in 10. So that's a lot. And the exact relationship between diabetes and breast cancer is not known because we don't know enough about metabolism, but we do know that both diseases represent some kind of breakdown in metabolism. Both have the same risk factors: age, diet, obesity, and lack of exercise. When you are a diabetic and you are diagnosed with breast cancer, believe it or not, you have a 40% higher chance of dying of breast cancer and a much higher risk of having a complication from chemotherapy. So we don't want either disease. We definitely do not want both. So what should we do? Well, we want to mitigate the risk of both diseases. And the way that we do that is we eat a diet that is heavy in fruits and vegetables. I advocate for the whole foods, plant-based diet, and that is a diet that comes from the produce aisle. It doesn't involve eating anything that's animal-based. It doesn't involve eating anything from the produce aisle because you don't want any added sugars or chemicals, and you don't want anything that adds an inflammation to your body, and the meat-based diet is an inflammatory diet. Number 2, get moderate levels of exercise every day. Do not drink alcohol and do not smoke. Those will mitigate the risk factors of both diseases. What if you have diabetes? What should you do? And it is known that diabetics, for some reason, are diagnosed with later stages of breast cancer. So if you're a diabetic, get your mammogram. Do not skip the mammogram because of other problems. Get your mammogram and eat healthy. So maybe we can reduce the risk of these chronic diseases. Let's see what we can do every day. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Dr. K. That's such great information because we all know a lot of people are diabetic. So you guys got to get your eating together, get on that plant-based diet. And I'm assuming that means no milk and butter. I mean, does that include
no milk and butter?
Dairy.
Everything your body needs is in the produce aisle. Everything.
Yes. All right, folks, you heard it. You heard it right here. I'm Carol Angela Davis. This is Ask Dr. K. Thank you so much, Dr. K.
Thanks for having me.
We'll be back next week with more impact news, more information that impacts your life every day. Thanks for watching.